Hey, welcome guys. So today we are going to be building up our Airfix B17. We're going to be doing some interior painting, obviously, before we, kind of put these clear parts and put the entire model together. We'll discuss the positives and the maybe not so positives of the build, kind of as they go. And then we'll obviously we'll call it 90% of the kit together. I'm going to save the props, the landing gear, and a couple of the machine guns that there's only 2 that get to be put in at the end. The others you have to put in kind of as you put the clear parts on. So it was it's an interesting build, good and bad, which again we will get to. I do apologize a little bit because this is a large kit, and if you've watched my videos, my workspace is a little bit small, and it starts to get a little bit tight at the end. So the painting video will be interesting. I might end up doing it, not in my booth here. But without further ado, let's flip it over to the bench and let's see how this B17 builds up. All right, so we are pretty obviously starting in the cockpit area. And right away, I had some pretty big ambitions for this kit. Coming recently off the ME410A build that I did, which was a brand new Airfix kit. That kit honestly could have come out of a Tamiya box, or Tamiya. This one's from like 2010, 2011, and it kind of felt that way. The walls of the cockpit are very, very tight. The assemblies for things like the seats here, they're kind of what I refer to as like floating assemblies, meaning you kind of got to hold them in place. So you can see the gap there at the bottom of the wall of the cockpit. Now, it is a 172 scale aircraft, so the windows are small, even though there are quite a few of them on this aircraft. So they won't really, a lot of the blemishes in this kit won't really be noticeable, which is the good news. The bad news is there's a lot of interior, and I wanted to do more to it, but I've been watching a lot of 48 scale aircraft videos, and people make those look absolutely beautiful, and kind of had that moment where I was like, oh yeah, this is 172 scale. So everything fit together at least absolutely good enough, but pretty well in the cockpit. Some areas of this kit fit absolutely perfect, and others are kind of, it's kind of that good combination of like the old nostalgic Airfix that didn't really go together that well, and the new Airfix that go together very well. It's somewhere in the middle. And at the time, I wanted to build this with the bomb bay doors open, which is really how the kit wants you to build it. That being said, halfway through this build, I mounted my 48 scale C47 on the wall, and it is wheels down against the wall. And I kind of realized I probably want to do that with this because it's a little bit too big to display anywhere except for a wall, at least in my apartment, condo, whatever you want to call it. So I'll be doing the bomb bay doors closed, so you'll see it kind of get half painted, but we have a couple radios and things that we need to put in place here. And this is an example of great Airfix engineering. Everything fits perfectly into place here. It makes sense. The only thing about this particular piece, as well as several pieces on the interior, if you watch the review, there are some large injector pin marks. I'm going to, spoiler alert, I'm going to cheat a little bit because some of them would be extremely difficult to remove. If not, the majority of them would be. It would be extremely time consuming, and this kit is already about a week's build. I think I actually spent slightly longer than a week. Now, that being said, I'm not at the workbench here 8 hours a day by any means. I'm doing it at night after my day job, things like that. So take that into account. but you do have to wait for quite a few things to dry. Not just glue, paint also, and some weathering stages and things like that. We have a couple miniature seats that we have to get glued in place. A couple more floating assemblies here. So just if you are building this kit or planning to, just take the time to kind of make sure these things all line up, because they won't go in right if they don't. And some tiny seat backs here. I do like to use the extra thin. If you put it on before small pieces like this, it kind of insta-glues the piece and then allows you to, fix it and move it around. And so with that, we are almost done with the smaller pieces. And I'm going to start building up a couple different sub-assemblies. You definitely need to build some sub-assemblies with this kit. There's no way around it. And generally, I like to build everything before I paint things. I don't really like glue going down over paint. I've only built 2 1/48 scale aircrafts, in my time at least, just because my space is small. But I'm always interested in how people don't completely mess up their paint job. So we have the bomb bay kind of area here, and this is all dry fitted right now. So this goes together very, very well. A couple of these pieces kind of snap into place like that right there. And then we're able to just, with a little bit of force, keep it together and do our gluing here. So pretty impressive in this section. So let that set up and dry. And we have a couple pieces that we're going to get glued into the interior here. Now, here is where I'm going to quote-unquote cheat a little bit with the injector pin marks. I'm using Ammo by MIG's Surfacer Putty. Now, this will by no means completely get rid of them. We're just going to carefully fill up the circle, and it's going to be good enough. I did have some moments where, I thought maybe I should go back and clean them, but based on where the windows were when I dry fit things together, they weren't going to be noticeable anyways. So if you are planning to build this kit again, do a little bit of your own kind of looking around and decide what is worth it, because you could spend probably an entire day removing the injector pin marks. I don't think that's an exaggeration, but they do seem to be in pretty good locations where you're not going to be bothered by them. Only when you're building the sub-assemblies. Once you get it built up, you shouldn't see them. Then we'll go ahead and we primed off camera, but we will then prime and start painting up some of the sub-assemblies in the interior. And the cockpit area, as well as this kind of rear deck, is going to be in mostly black. So we'll start there, which is a hard place to come back from, but nothing a couple extra layers can't fix. And then we'll paint the bomb bay doors here in the flat aluminum color, or gloss aluminum. Forget which one it is. It is gloss aluminum. So you can see the injector pin marks sort of disappear. They're definitely less pronounced than they were. But when I spray over the one on the bottom here, you can see as I turn the piece, it is still there. It just looks like a blemish in the paint rather than a sunken, circle. So again, just going for good enough. I did spend a lot of time in this kit, so I wasn't really interested in spending, like I said, that much more. Then we have to brush paint. The kind of cockpit walls here are going to be sort of a wood color. If you have access to Humbrol, or if you have Humbrol paints, obviously you can just go based off of the directions. I do not have any Humbrol paints, so essentially the best thing I can suggest is go on Google before you start to build the kit. Type in, what it's like Humbrol 195, for example, is satin dark green. Do your best to just kind of look at the picture and say, all right, that looks like Tamiya's dark green, which is what I'm using here, and kind of fill in the blanks that way. There are paint charts out there and things like that, paint conversion charts. I have found they have holes in them, especially when it comes to Humbrol. So again, I would just do your best guesswork. No one's going to be looking, hopefully, at my models and saying, hey, that's not satin dark green, that's just dark green. Pretty much just building these for the enjoyment of building them. And then I know I said I wasn't going to use any markers, but at this time, the play markers that I ordered showed up, and I was very excited to use, in particular, this wood color, and to see how well they could detail paint. And I'm very happy to say, because the other AK Interactive markers are not good for detail painting because they're kind of round tipped, and the tip is not pointed like this. So these really allow you, this is impressive, to detail paint on a 172 aircraft interior. That's really impressive if you think about it. So we get a couple more pieces of the interior painted up here. And then if you saw before, I did glue in the area where like the bomb sight is. I glued that into the front because there was just enough room that I figured I would be able to reach and paint. So we'll get the floor of that piece set up as well and painted. But again, I would definitely try dry fitting that piece. It is really, really tight, and it is hard to get in there, although it is possible. So I would make that determination on your own. And once we have that is the majority of the painting of the interior done. We're going to get our seats glued into place. And you could easily, I kind of switched to MIG Ultra Glue later in this kind of build series, build video, whatever. Right now I'm just using the old school orange cap Tamiya cement. I try to really stay away from extra thin, again, when it comes to paint. Sometimes it works, and other times it just immediately wipes the color off, which is what happens most times. But the old school Tamiya cement, it stays in place much better. And I find in particular it bonds glued or painted pieces together pretty well. Then I also do, just to add a little bit of detail, I go over and dry brush just with that flat aluminum color, really anything that's black, minus I guess the floor. So the bomb sight here, those radios, things like that. And I will say that is ever so slightly noticeable when you do look through the windows. So I would recommend this as well, doing just a really quick wash on the inside. We're using Ammo by MiG's Interiors color. You easily could use a darker wash, and for a little bit I kind of wanted to do a darker wash. I tried a couple different ones on the tail, and this is the one that I obviously landed on, pretty much because it gives kind of a mossy, like just a dirty, grimy color rather than a true pin wash. This is going to more or less change the color of the aluminum, and I thought that just looked good. And then once that sets up for maybe 30 to 60 minutes, just removing it with a Q-tip or cotton bud, whichever you like to call it. But careful not to remove too much. I do, because the windows in this kit are not the greatest pieces of clear plastic, and I'm sure I'm going to scratch them up a little bit. I wanted to make sure there was enough there to kind of see through those windows. And with that, the interior is coming together, I think, pretty nicely here. We do have a couple decals or decals that we have to get put into this kit. And you could easily, the instructions wanted you to do these earlier. You could easily do them earlier. For the sake of not stopping and doing all this stuff, I wanted to get everything put together first. I will say I did not clear coat the interior before doing the decals, which I know is a big kind of no-no when it comes to, you know, the silvering and the decals being glossy. But I will say when you look through the cockpit window, you can't really tell. I do use a version of microsol and microset to kind of get them in place and, you know, melt them down a little bit. And I think that was good enough just for the sake of time. And there's a lot of time you can put into this kit. So figuring out what is good enough, I think, is key when it comes to building something like this. You're not getting a superb level of detail. And as we'll see in a little bit here, the fit is not superb either. So breaking your back to find out that the fuselage doesn't fit together, I'm very happy with the amount of time that I spent enough, but not too much. Then we're going to start putting in a couple windows here. It's like a rear tail gunner's door. And I'm going to use Ammo by MiG's Ultra Glue. If you look at the windows in this kit, you can tell half of the clear parts are going to be painted and a window, and the other half are just windows. So on pieces that are just windows, I'm going to use the Ammo by MiG glue because it dries clear, it doesn't fog the canopy. And on pieces that, you know, are going to have like a silver edge, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use Tamiya's Extra Thin, which is always a little scary. But if it does kind of seep onto the window, it's fine because a lot of it will be painted anyways. And then we are going ahead and we are installing the sub-assemblies into the interior here. And I'm not showing it on camera, but I have been dry fitting multiple times. And I will say up to this point, everything was dry fitting more or less perfectly. When you put the two fuselage halves together, after all these pieces are in, it works, it sticks together. And I think I know where the error that I made was, but we will get to that in a couple minutes. So again, using the extra thin kind of on the bottom here. I'm not going to use it on the top. Anywhere that it's going to bleed color, I want it to be obviously unnoticeable. And then this is like the rear wheel well. That is a very difficult piece to get to slot in. It does not click into place. You just have to do... I spent like 30 minutes looking at this, trying to figure out how it worked. You just have to make it work to the best of your ability and just hope that it kind of, you know, it comes together in the end. Then we're going to start on the ball turret. And I think this is where, and I don't really know why, but I think this is where the issue kind of took place. So also we'll get this glued up with Ammo by MiG's Ultra Glue, which is not the easiest. Especially, I don't know, wearing gloves feels unnatural to me and kind of slows me down, but eventually we get there. And I'm just going to use the Ammo by MiG Ultra Glue. It totally works on plastic. It works on painted or unpainted plastic. It just takes longer to dry. 10-15 minutes, and then it's not fully set, but set enough that you can keep working. But it does not cause any paint to bleed, which is really, really important here. So we have the ball turret assembled. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to put this in. Now, this is the mistake I think that I made with this kit. It would be difficult to slot this in my opinion, when the two fuselage halves are together. The instructions want you to do it before you put them together, but it didn't fit, and it fit before I put the ball turret in. It just escaped me to do that, but as you can see there's just something in the way. And I did let that fully set up and dry before I put the fuselage in. I didn't want the ball turret falling out. So something to keep in mind if you are going to build this kit is definitely dry fit and just make sure it's not blocking. I still don't think it's blocking because this ends up going together totally fine in that area. But I did have to work from the back to the front because otherwise this was never going to go together. And spoiler alert, it doesn't all go together. There is a little bit of putty that I need to use. So if you find yourself in this predicament, just go section by section. Make sure this honestly took me over the course of a day, at least an afternoon, like a full afternoon into the evening to get this all set up because I wanted each section to obviously dry on its own. And you want this kit in particular to be you want this fit to be as good as possible because it's a 172 scale aircraft. We looked at it in the review and there's a lot of detailed panel lines, but they're really shallow. They're probably in scale, but really, really shallow and therefore really easy to erase with a sanding stick. So I err on the side of kind of sanding less, and maybe there's a little bit of a line running down, but I'd rather have all my panel lines intact and have just an ever so slightly seam going down the middle than to completely erase the panel lines. And I don't have a scribing tool or anything. I just use an X-Acto knife. But here you go. Here's the two pieces that no matter how hard I tried, I could not get them to fit together. So a little bit of putty will fix the trick. I will say the clear nose piece didn't fit perfectly, and I was worried about that in this instance. It might have been because the cockpit's like a little bit bloated here, but unsure because it didn't fit perfectly. So I don't have the other example to go off. Then we'll get started on the wings, and I'll show you one. I won't bore you with the second wing since they are pretty much identical. And a couple small pieces. These are difficult to slot in place. They're again kind of those floating assembly type pieces that you have to get them into the perfect spot. They don't really sit there on their own, which coming, with a circle here, it is a little difficult. So I did this first wing. I was kind of getting up, sitting down, letting things dry, thinking that was the right way to do it. And when I built the second wing, I said, I'm just going to do this all at once. And I did things kind of in rapid succession. And it definitely worked better that way. Having, these pieces still be a little bit movable when you slot the two wing halves together is, I think, preferable. It'll just fit better to do it that way. You will have to make sure you don't move any pieces out of place, but like I said, I think that's the way to go, rather than actually taking your time. Sometimes in this hobby, it is better to go quick. Then we have a couple kind of vents here that we're going to get installed into the inside of the wing, as well as one long kind of piece here. The instructions do tell you to paint the interior of the plane black, or of the plane wing black. I did not. I hope I don't pay for that later, but it's really those two vents. There's 4 in total that, yes, technically you will be able to see into them, but what I'm going to do is basically just airbrush around that area So if you're concerned about it, you could easily just take a black paint marker and paint right behind them black. But I think the shadows will take care of it, but only time will tell. Then we have these kind of grates that we need to get glued into place. And they don't fit all that well, but it's okay if they're a little recessed. That's how mine ended up being. I would just take care to not push on them too hard once the glue is down, because you don't want glue getting pushed out the other end. So once we are done with that, we are ready to put the two halves together. And as you can see here, the fit is pretty good. It's really just the engine area that isn't perfect. And as you can see there, the gap with the engine on the top, the second time when I built the wing and I put that together all at once, I was able to kind of squish it back into place. Whereas with this one, not so much, because that piece is already completely set up on the bottom half of the wing. But you will need to do a little bit of clamping here, but the wings went together much better than, some of the other areas of the plane. But again, just going section by section, trying to make sure that each piece in itself is set up. Once those are dried, I'm going to do a quick sand. There was a little bit, I don't know if it was flash or a little bit of a burr, some paint sticking out, whatever it was, just a really quick sand. That's like 1200 grit sandpaper. I don't want to do anything too crazy because, again, I don't want to erase the panel lines. And then it's time to glue the wings onto the main body here. And there was a sprue gate there. Unfortunately, I sanded it a little bit too far back, but nothing a little putty can't help take care of. And the fit of the wings overall is very good. So I will say, and I said it at the beginning, I apologize because things do get a little bit tight in terms of being able to put things together on camera here at the end of this build. Once the wings are on, it is a large aircraft, even for 172 scale. It's, definitely bigger than a 148 fighter, probably even bigger. It's bigger than my 148 Mosquito. Actually, I built 3 148 scale aircraft. I forgot about that one. It's not a whole lot bigger than that, but definitely a longer wingspan and things like that. Probably about, it's still a little bit longer by the looks of it. So I do glue the top and the bottom of the wings kind of separate. This was another example of, even though the fit ended up being really good, kind of have to work it in different pieces. If you put the top in, the bottom came out kind of thing. So just gluing section by section again turned out to be, I think, the best, at least in this circumstance. Then we will get the tail in place here. And those fit a lot better. As you see, that slotted right in and no issues. It didn't really separate on the bottom either. Once those are at least decently dry, I do kind of move it for a second here. But once the tails are dry enough in place, we have to slot in that kind of back half. And that's a tight fit. Once it's in there, you probably could get away without gluing it. It's such a tight fit, but we're going to put a little glue, obviously, on it anyways. And then we'll get the other half of the tail set up. Once that is done, we're going to flip the plane over and we're going to start kind of assembling the details around the engines here. And these pieces have really nice cutouts, as you see. They kind of just fall right into place. And then we'll get our exhaust put in there. Now, there is a cover that goes over those exhausts. If you watched my review, my kit came with one. I misplaced, or it just didn't have the other. I tried getting a replacement from Airfix. They sent me the wrong part. And then they released that brand new color scheme of the same kit. It's in a green, and I really want a dark green B17. Yes, I could have done that with this, but I also like the silver and yellow. So here I am. I'm just going to get another one and build this without the engine covers. Once we get the engines put into place, this is another great time to not let things set up. I followed the instructions. I went back and looked at them. Getting those two pieces to line up right there where I'm gluing right now is very difficult. For some reason, again, I followed the directions to a T, and all four were incorrect. So I did have to pry them apart and, get them set up. So again, I don't know if it was an error in the instructions. I looked at it for a while. Could have been user error, but it is what it is. Next up, we have these small interior kind of caps that are going to go over the engines. And they are a tight fit around the interior of the engine, but they kind of just hang in place. They don't really slot in anywhere in particular. And then we will put the final cap on the engine. And this is another good time to, again, kind of do it in not rapid succession, but quick enough, because you do want those pieces to be able to, I had to go back and pinch them together, kind of use my fingernail to pry that interior ring back outward. And then while that's drying, we'll assemble the landing gear, which the inside rim, it is a very, very tight fit into the two larger wheels. The two larger wheels build up and look pretty nice. They got a nice little, maybe shallow, but a nice detailed tread. So I had to sand out the interior of the wheel a little bit. So again, if you're building this kit, it's a really, really tight fit, and you might have to do a little bit of work on that. Then we're going to put the first half of the landing gear in here. I guess we're going to put all the landing gear in. We're just not going to put the tires. And normally I would save this step for, after painting, but I wanted to put anything that was going to be aluminum color on, before we painted it. I am going to spray paint this kit, so I want to make sure that anything that needs to be silver is on the kit, because Tamiya spray paint and their acrylic paint, it is slightly different colors. It's the same color, but it just the finish is a little different. But the nice thing is the landing gear is really, really strong. Now that it's set up and I've rested the vehicle on it, it's going to be really, really strong, which on some kits it's not. And probably a factor that I glued it in before I painted is partially why it is strong. So that is definitely a benefit of doing a gloss aluminum plane. Then we have the bomb bay door, which again, they want you to cut it in half. The fit, if you don't display them open, it doesn't fit. You have to trim those little nubs. And then I did a quick little couple passes of the X-Acto knife down the middle just to make the piece flexible. That was definitely a requirement to get this to fit in place. But once we have that glued, we are nearing the end. We just have a couple, like this is the rear turret. We have 5 or 6 turrets and kind of gun emplacements that we have to get set up here. So this is definitely something that you could do. I went step by step, but you definitely could have done this when you had the paints out in the beginning, doing the interior. And thinking back on it, probably should have done that myself, because you do have to paint, it at least calls for painting the interior of like this piece. Although most of this piece is going to get painted on the exterior anyways, it would just be a time saver. And getting like the machine guns and things painted up would obviously be a time saver as well. So once we have that done, good thing we're going to paint the outside, because that is a good example of what Tamiya Extra Thin will do to the paint. But again, it's something that we're going to paint on the outside, so we won't see that. And therefore, I'm going to use the Extra Thin because I think it does work better than the Ammo by MIG glue. It just, like I said, destroys the paint and can fog the canopy. Then we have this turret, which is really interesting because it has you install these 2 rear windows. And then we're going to cover them up in 2 seconds here, and you'll never know that they exist. This turret is definitely really, really difficult to get into place. You kind of have to try to pry the nose apart, if that makes sense, to get it to fit in. Once it's in there, it definitely won't come out even without glue, because the nose kind of seals around it. But here you go. We're covering up that rear window, so kind of a step they probably could have just omitted that detail, in my opinion. And then a couple more small pieces that we're going to glue into the bottom here. Get the rear door. And again, I'm going to use Tamiya's Extra Thin because you can see the little window there. The majority of that door is going to get painted, so if any glue kind of leaks out, we should be fine there. And then we have our kind of sky turret there, as well as the turret that's going to go right behind the pilot seats here. I'm going to take a little bit of a risk here and use Tamiya Extra Thin, because frankly at this stage, again, this kit's a lot of work, and I just wanted to kind of be done with the build. The building and stopping to paint things and let them dry, something you don't really have to do in armor modeling. And I build majority armor models, so this is kind of where my patience gets to be a little bit like, okay, come on. After that, we'll put the kind of ball turret shaped window on there, and we'll start getting the clear pieces put into the nose here as well. This kind of cylindrical or dome shaped piece is really difficult to get in there. I don't know if that's because the nose is a little bit bloated when I had to fill it. It didn't snap together perfectly, but I just kind of had to do my best with that one. Good news is the cockpit window is perfect. And then we will get building on the props here. And this is pretty much the final step here. I will say I tried to make the propellers workable. One of them got glued into place, so I glued them all into place. Just kind of what happens. I don't know what the trouble is, but maybe 1/72 scale props are just meant to be kind of stationary. But that is the B17 build minus the landing gear, or at least the tires, and the props, which we are going to save for after we paint. And it'll make sense when we paint why we save them. But if you've made it this far and you haven't already, I would please ask you to like and subscribe to the channel. We'll be doing many more model builds, aircraft, armor, and I do even have a handful of cars that I might eventually get to one day. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments what you think of the build. If you have built this kit yourself, you know, if you see an area, maybe you could have done something differently, whatever. I like to read all the comments, and I do respond to all of them. So feel free on that regard. In terms of the build, this is definitely a tricky build. Airfix says, it's a like level 3, however they rate it, it's their expert rating. Now, I do not think of myself as an expert in anything. Um, Especially when it comes to modeling, you see what some people put out and it's just amazing. And I was able to build this kit. So I wouldn't say like truly an expert kit, but it requires a lot of time and there was 190 steps or something like that. It's a high part count for a 172 scale, and it is large. So there's going to be a lot of surface area to paint and weather and things like that. But it does look really, really good. There were some missteps and mishaps along the way, fit issues, but kind of like every other model I've ever built, you get to that final stage, you put everything together, and I think it really starts to look good. And these clear pieces are going to get painted, minus the small windows there, and the nose cone obviously is going to be completely clear. But you see, they're not the greatest to see through, and I think we have just enough detail in there to kind of make it convincing. So I enjoyed this kit. There's not a lot of other 172 scale B17s out there. There are some amazing 148 scale ones that I would love to build one day, but I think Revel is the only other 72 scale, at least out of the major kind of brands. And being in the US, I don't like Revel. I know Revel of Germany is different, but I haven't been able to get my hands on one of those yet. So I went for this one, and I would recommend it. It is definitely a niche, and it fills that niche. Coming up next, we will be doing some obviously painting and weathering in part 2 of this video. But I'll leave you guys with the plane for another 30 seconds or so here. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you on the next one.